Welcome to Sun Gardens Dubrovnik. This is a world exclusive. I'm reading the first chapter of my new book, Around the World in 80 Disasters, to the fabulous sales and marketing team. They promise they'll laugh. I'm a bit nervous, but I'm going to go ahead and read it. So here we go. Chapter 1 is called Moscow, Homeless in the Soviet Union, a long way from Manchester. They had never seen anything like it in this quiet and unfashionable suburb of Moscow, about an hour from the centre. A suburb that was so off the radar that there was no reason for any foreigner to ever visit. And yet here was a young ginger-haired Westerner. The rumour was he was British, who had arrived looking lost an hour before, who was now unpacking his tent and preparing to spend the night camping next to the children's playground. Money was more than tight, but as a first-year Russian student at the University of Manchester, I had decided to invest in a one-month Russian course in Moscow during my first university summer. Having paid for the course and homestay accommodation with a real Soviet family in July 1991, I needed to make some decisions about my finances and the summer. Once I got to Moscow, life was cheap. I could live a month there for almost nothing, and assuming I could get to Bulgaria afterwards for my month of teaching English with the religious sect, the Moonies, that should also cost me next to nothing. The tricky part was getting to Moscow and back from Bulgaria with only £200 or $300 for the whole summer. Flying to Moscow was out of the question, so I decided to hitchhike from Manchester to the Russian capital. What could possibly go wrong? Sorry, I'm only going about 20 miles as far as Stafford, answered the first man to give me a lift, after I told him that Moscow was my destination. But I hopped in anyway. Stafford became Dover, Ostend, and soon Poland, after a very generous Pole took me all the way to his hometown from the Belgian ferry, before feeding me and housing me overnight in his home across the border from Frankfurt an der Oder. He then slipped me 20 Deutschmarks the next morning before dropping me off on the road to Warsaw. A 10-minute wait and I was off again and was soon in the Polish capital. Destination train station. It had gone like a dream, but I wasn't insane. The train from the border town of Brest in Belarus to Moscow took 24 hours, so who knows how long it would take to hitchhike. Beside a $3 ticket to Brest from Warsaw would take me inside the Soviet Union, and the real cheap living could begin. I had been told that the Brest to Moscow ticket was just $1. My illusions were shattered when I went to board the train. I had heard about people hanging off trains in India, and now I had a real-life East European equivalent, and there was not a hope I would make it alive, as it was so crowded, and so I gave up my train plan. I fell into broken conversation with an equally dejected Russian who was returning home after selling his larder for good money. He ended up smuggling me into a hostel for the night, and he was gone when I awoke. Luckily, I still had all my meagre possessions. Onward travel options were limited, and I finally took advantage of a $90 one-way special with Polish airline LOT later that day, thereby abandoning my lofty overland ambitions, and I touched down at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport some hours later. My $300 for the summer had become $210. Having negotiated passport control, I was through. Alone in the Soviet Union. I suppose I could have called the host family and got them to meet me, but it seemed an inconvenience for them, added to the fact that my Russian wasn't good enough to ask for change for the phone, never mind make a phone call. The school had sent me an excellent detailed map of Moscow, and I had found my address on the map, just a couple of inches from Red Square. How hard could it be to find an address in the Soviet Union with such a map? A couple of inches on a Moscow map is a long way in reality. By now, I was on a mission to arrive unannounced, proudly showing that I could get by without having to rely on my host family. All was going well as a friendly lady with a little English mothered me onto the dirty yellow bus, and we were on our way. Claiming she was going the same way, she escorted me to the fabled Moscow metro, giving me a 15 kopeck token and bid me farewell, insisting I got out after 2 stops. The escalator was fast and deep, the train punctual and quick, and within minutes I was ascending another escalator and out into the evening sunshine, and the street containing my new home. I felt a flush of pride. My house number was 268, and I was passing 34, so not far to go. Russian apartment blocks are further apart than terraced houses in Manchester. Each has about 500 apartments, followed by a 20-metre space before the next block. After more than an hour inching towards my goal, I finally saw the magic 268 and veered off to the left. The various entrances were around the back, facing a massive central courtyard. It was perhaps 8 p.m, and there was a relaxed, neighbourly feeling about the place. Kids playing, old ladies gossiping on benches, friends walking and smoking. They all noticed the arrival of the foreigner. I nodded to a few and checked the paper with the address. Entrance 5. Pleased, I passed 3 starstruck babushkas sitting on a bench by the door and entered the dimly lit corridor. The rickety lift smelled of urine, and I doubted its uneven floor would hold my weight, but I went up to the 5th floor. There in front of me was my final destination. Under the spy hole of a heavy metal door, a small oval metal tag bore the numbers 492. I had done it. Managed to find my way to my new home with no assistance, all the way from Manchester to the heart of the Soviet Union. I was incredibly proud of myself. I rang the bell, my heart pounding a little, my sentence of introduction prepared. I heard footsteps, but the door remained closed. Kto tam? It was an auspicious moment. I was having my first Russian conversation with a native on Soviet soil. And I understood. Admittedly, asking who I was not the most taxing of questions, but it was a start. Mnie zовут Paul Bradbury, я Anglichanin, I replied with pride, as though I had uttered a code to open the gates of Babylon. The door remained closed. The voice muttered something incomprehensible, and worse, the footsteps retreated. I rang the bell again, only to go through the same routine again. For whatever reason, the voice was not convinced. I needed another plan of attack, and my options were limited. I decided to try and find a phone, but with no coins, a private phone was the only option. I went back to the old ladies sitting on the bench downstairs, who eyed me with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. Ja, Anglichanin, wie telephone? And then I realised I'd asked if they were a telephone, but I hoped they got my drift. After some brief consultation amongst themselves, my pathetic appeal for a telephone seemed to have not only been understood, but granted, and I was led to a ground floor flat and handed an archaic bright purple phone. I dialed the number of my host family. Menyazo Clunk. It seemed the voice was even less amenable to telephone solicitation. My last resort was to call the emergency number on the school's welcome letter. They should be able to sort something out. Under the watchful eye of the spellbound old ladies, I dialed, and it rang, and rang, and rang. A very Soviet emergency number. I'm sure that there were useful practical suggestions from the old dears themselves, but I didn't understand a word. It would soon be dark, and here I was, alone on my first night in the Soviet Union. There was nothing for it but to unpack the tent and choose a grassy spot next to the kids' playground. I was aware of the growing crowd, of other windows opening and people peering out at this strange sight, and once the tent was assembled, I nodded to the crowd and disappeared inside. It had been an adrenaline-filled day, but I had finally made it to the Soviet Union. I was safe, kind of, and although the accommodation was not quite how I planned it, tomorrow was another day, and I was sure I could get the voice to crack. I drifted into sleep. Englishman! I was roused from slumber soon afterwards by a young male voice. Unzipping the tent, I emerged to find a tall, handsome, young blonde man hovering over me. Are you Paul Bradbury? Shocked that he knew my name, I was impressed at how good the KGB were. Scarily impressive. I nodded, wondering if I was about to be arrested for violating some vagrancy law. My name is Timur. I hear my grandfather would not let you into the apartments. I'm sorry, we were not expecting you for another month. Come now, you must be hungry. To the delight of the lingering onlookers, the tent was dissembled, explanations were given, and we disappeared to the 5th floor and through the previously impregnable entrance door to apartment 492. It was time to meet the voice. A hugely humble 84-year-old pensioner greeted me warmly and apologetically, ushering me into the kitchen before plying me with fried chicken and vodka, as if stuffing me somehow could nullify the shame he felt at refusing entry to his foreign guest. No amount of assurance from me could console him. He had been instructed never to open the door to a stranger. If the excitement of the summer of 1991 had stopped with the arrival in flat 492, it would have been a memorable time. But the ensuing weeks, attempting to learn Russian in Moscow and teaching English with the Munis religious sect in Bulgaria, took the adventure to a whole new level. But that is a story for later in the book.
Great!
Like it?
Yeah, I like it.
And tomorrow morning's coffee is Chapter 2, St. Petersburg, How to Get Arrested in Your Childhood Bathroom at St. Petersburg train station.
Okay.
See you 8 o'clock tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm still alive.
Don't be late.
Yeah.